Hello again.
Hello. I have a slightly croakier voice this week.
Disclaimer, Miss Flanagan is unwell.
Yes, and I might sneeze or,
So you'll hear some sniffings.
Sniffing, maybe some coughing.
And
but,
some croaky voice.
The history will still be good. So.
Always.
Thank you.
100%.
Yeah. Right, so this week we're going to go back to Tudors and we're going to do Mid-Tudor Crisis.
The Mid-Tudor period that could be considered a crisis.
Depends on your point of view of whether you see it as a moment of, everything's gone wrong, or, I suppose we've got a boy king, a girl king, and
a Catholic queen.
Dodginess. It is a point of contention, the Mid-Tudor period.
Yeah.
I think a lot of students think, I must call it a crisis, when it's not. It's open to interpretation.
Yeah, and that can kind of cause problems later down the line when you call the Mid-Tudor period the Mid-Tudor Crisis period, and especially if the question is about...
You've got yourself confused, haven't you?
I have, a little bit, yeah. If you have a question about whether it was a Mid-Tudor Crisis and you keep talking about the period as a whole as the Mid-Tudor Crisis, but you're not saying it's a crisis, well, it's just very confusing, isn't it?
That's like if you had a time machine and you go back in your own timeline, are you in your own timeline? Will you not be able to meet your opposite? You've got yourself confused.
Wow.
You see, this is what happens with the Mid-Tudor Crisis.
So you just need to call it the Mid-Tudor period and then talk about whether it's a crisis or not.
True. The other thing to bear in mind is that the exam board like the Mid-Tudor period / crisis because students will be confused by it. And it's easy marks they can make of tripping you over and kind of taking advantage of the confusion and the tears.
And there should be one. There should be a question on that. And there wasn't last year. And I think they were kind of told off for it that you can't really expect students to revise, half?
Sorry.
Excuse you. Half of the opposite content and then not have a question on it.
Yeah, and especially if the time period comes up, it tends to be quite juicy questions that they'll ask.
Yeah, fairly straightforward.
Quite straightforward, but again, students will avoid it because they think it's too confusing.
But it is also a lot to talk about, so you should really focus on those questions.
The other thing with the Mid-Tudor period is they like to be nasty to you and give you the years as opposed to the leaderships. If that makes sense.
And that's another thing that you need to be aware of as well. Like when you're checking out the years, think, okay, is that including Henry? Is it not including Henry? Is it including Elizabeth? It's not including Elizabeth.
Who is involved in that question? And they'll do that through the years, so you will need to know your years if that period comes up.
Yeah, soz, but it is history.
So, tell us more about the Mid-Tudor period. Why would it even be considered a crisis?
Because of all those darn rebellions.
Darn rebellions. Oh, those darn rebellions.
Gosh darn rebellions. And also there's quite a lot of social economic issues that are causing the rebellions too. So you've got some instability economically, trade-wise.
Yeah.
Enclosure-wise,
the poor
religion-wise,
leadership-wise,
and religion again to do with the leadership.
True, but just general leadership because you've got a boy king, Regency Council, and you've also got a woman
who is very damaged.
She is. There's no other way around that, is there?
She's got a lot, but considering she tries.
She does try. She's very trying.
She is very trying.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
And then you've got Elizabeth, who's also quite young, slightly traumatised a little bit when she's first queen. But the counter-arguments about whether it's a crisis, you could argue, is the fact that no one really has that much of an issue about the fact that they've become monarchs. So they have support.
Yeah, and it stays fairly stable the whole way through the period as well. Even though there's wobbles and rebellions, realistically they're quite easy to deal with rebellions the whole way through for both Edward, Mary, and even Elizabeth.
Yeah, they all keep their heads. None of them get overthrown.
No usurpation.
Yeah, whether you could call it a crisis is what it's the general feeling, and the modern interpretation today is that it wasn't a crisis.
Yeah, and I think
there was just lots of trouble.
Yeah, there's just difficulties, but there's difficulties in ruling the whole way through. There we go.
Not like Elizabeth II today with her super stable monarchy.
Let's not. So to begin with, we've got Edward as our for this period. We could include Henry VIII, but for us, our question will not include that.
Yeah, so I think the question we're going to look at is going to be a rebellions question. So we're focusing really on that. And I guess we'll draw in some aspect of it, but again, it's just a revision, just a recap on the rebellions that happen.
You'll probably want to go back over your notes or the textbooks or whatever you can use to kind of top up your knowledge regarding this. It's more about the argument that we'll develop in this podcast today.
Yeah.
Because I'm too ill.
We can't do that. You're just going to be on the floor then, aren't you?
Yeah.
So, Mid-Tudor period, you can argue, starts from end of Henry, but if we'll just say, we're not going to include end of Henry, 1547 onwards then.
Yeah.
So the first rebellion, technically is, well, I guess technically and specifically, Western Rebellion.
Yeah. Although the same year as the Cats Rebellion.
And within the same period, there's a little bit of overlap.
Little. Why did you say a little bit of overlap? 1549, troublesome year.
Yeah.
Very bad. Why? Why 1549 that these groups kick off?
Oh, why could it be? Because we've got that Regency Council, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
We've got Somerset, who's given all his nice little prizes away to the Regency Council. He's bought them all off and then gone, so you don't mind if I'm number one?
I always find Somerset's a bit like a character in Game of Thrones.
They all are.
Well, no, but him in particular, if you remember, of being a Seymour uncle, I'm going to take advantage, I'm going to get Henry VIII buried next to my sister.
So he's like Littlefinger.
No,
Maybe more.
Someone more sinister.
Anyway, let's keep...
Sorry.
I think it's all the cold and flu. You've gone off topic here. But anyway. So, the Western starts on the 6th of June, 1549. And we're saying, because of the Regency Council, Somerset, taking advantage.
Land problems, people are angry.
Yeah, and he tries to deal with the land issues. What are the land issues?
Basically, our good friend enclosure has happened.
Again, still going on.
All still go. Is this land mine? Is it the landowners? Where are my sheep going to graze? It's problematic.
Made worse by the other friend of ours, monastic land.
Oh, good old monastic land. Enclosure and monastic land kind of go hand in hand, don't they?
Oh, that rhymed.
Did it?
Enclosure, monastic land, they go hand in hand. That's a really good way of remembering the duo.
That's a bad way of remembering
I like it.
Put it down to cold and flu.
Yeah, and I think the other issue for Western as well is the sheep tax. So they have lots of sheep in Cornwall, but they're not actually the more rich side of society, which is the case kind of elsewhere. It's more that these people living in Cornwall have got maybe 1 or 2 sheep, and there's not many places they can put the sheep apart from on the mountains.
And then someone comes along and goes, that's not your land, you can't put your sheep there. It's my land.
Or you can, but you're going to have to pay more money because Somerset's put the sheep tax on to try and deal with the more rich people elsewhere in the country. But those particular farmers in Cornwall are particularly aggrieved because they don't actually earn very much money, so the sheep tax doesn't really work for them. And then also there's the other theme that runs in this rebellion, and it's probably the more predominant one because it's also got a particular name, but it's the religious discontent. Because it's a Catholic stronghold, they don't really like what Somerset's doing in terms of changing the church to a more Protestant way. What else is it called?
It's referred to as the Prayer Book Rebellion because they adamantly are opposed to the changes that have taken place. And they see it as don't they refer to it as a weird Christmas game?
They do.
Which never really makes sense to me. It's like Monopoly.
Yeah, I just think, well, what kind of Christmas game do they play?
Either way, but they don't like the changes that have taken place. They feel it's too radical. By changing the Bible, changing the prayer book in particular, they find that particularly offensive to their religious ideas.
Yeah, so it's those 3 things really, but religion tends to dominate the general perspective of it is the uniting factor, I think. But like all of the rebellions, they always have more than one motivation because you want to get a lot of people behind it.
Yeah, and remember that to get thousands upon thousands of people to rebel against the system in the Tudor period, it's never going to be just one motive that unifies people. It's going to be a kind of conglomerate of everything kind of in together, of different ideas. Of those people might be there because of religion, other people are purely there because of land, other people are there just because they hate the system. Either way, you're starting to manipulate it to get those big numbers that are involved with it, kind of like the Pilgrimage of Grace.
Yeah,
that, you know, it might be one unifying factor, but there are other grievances behind everything the whole way through the Tudor period.
Yeah, you just weigh up the evidence that's there to suggest what the motivations are.
Yeah.
So then you've got the Cats Rebellion, which is when?
It's the 8th of July in 1549, and it goes on till August 1549.
As does the Western, so they're having a terrible time when that kicks off as well.
1549 is a bad year. The summer in particular is a bad time.
Yeah, people were annoyed.
It's hot.
What
Probably.
is it? Maybe.
You've got the idea with the Cats Rebellion. It is different in the fact of it seems to be predominantly involved with land as the problem. You've got to remember that Cat himself is a landowner, and the story goes that all these rebels get on his land, start taking his fence posts up. He's like, oi, I'm going to go and speak to them. Gets there, and he's like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, we're doing this because people have stolen our land. And he goes, that's a great idea. I'm going to join in.
Yeah, he's like, wait, what?
No, don't.
You can't grow your carrots because of my fencing and because I want sheep. That's actually really unfair.
And then he joins them. He becomes a hero.
I mean, it's amazing to think this guy just suddenly was like, yeah, what have I been doing my whole life?
Exactly, he has a revelation right there and then. With a
I think
fence
it's
post.
because he's a merchant, isn't it? So it's not like he was raised noble. He was a bit like, oh, I know what it's like to be poor and I feel in pain. Okay, let's go and rip up some fences.
And kick hedges. That's my favourite part of the whole Ket Rebellion, is that they burn some hedges down and other people go and kick them and run away.
I mean, you wouldn't really know, would you? Because they're pretty sturdy hedges. I kicked that hedge over there.
Yeah,
oh,
but that's what I like about it. I think people made it up and went, oh yeah, as part of that rebellion I kicked that hedge.
You can see my foot mark there. Interesting. So that's going on in Norwich.
And always exciting times in Norwich.
So it's on the other side of the country.
It's
East Anglia. I think that tends to be another thing that confuses students. They don't know their geography sometimes in England. I mean, my geography's poor, but Western is Cornwall. East Anglia is the Cats, so it's the other side of the country. And also, what's important about Cats? In contrast to Western,
it's a Protestant stronghold, so predominantly Protestant during that time period. They still have religious disagreements with central government, but actually, I think it's more to do with like monastic lands in places like Norfolk or Norwich.
Yeah, because those issues with like which the sheep tax was meant to be solving was probably more for those areas, especially where the Cats Rebellion is, because they're getting a bit annoyed by how much land and responsibility and authority the gentry have got there. And that's because a lot of the people are Protestant. They've bought a lot of the land that's come from the monasteries in that area. So you could say there is a bit of a monastic link, but it's not necessarily a motive necessarily.
No.
So really there is some religious aspects, but it's much more social economic. But it is, I guess, in response to Somerset saying he was going to do something about enclosure. They did like an assessment of all the enclosure in the area, but then not much happens.
And I think you've got that both of them take place in 1549 shows you how unhappy people are generally with the Regency Council as well. Not only has Somerset said he's going to do something about enclosure, I think at that time there's frustration in the fact that it is a Regency Council for a boy king, which is quite a weak moment in authority. So these two kind of sides of England that kick off are kicking off because of the weakness of the system as well.
Yeah.
So it's challenging authority.
Yeah, so they're going to have issues again with like some of the local councillors, clergymen, but it stems, I guess, from the fact that this Regency Council doesn't really have enough authority, isn't really doing enough.
Yeah. That leads us on to Mary then. And what's the major rebellion that takes place under Mary?
So you have the Wyatt Rebellion, that is in 26th of January 1554, and that lasts to February 1554. Vague, I know.
Yeah. So you've got with the Wyatt Rebellion, it's meant to be 4 different nobles rising up and challenging the authority of Mary, and their hope is to get rid of her from the throne and either put in Edward Courtenay and get Edward Courtenay married to Elizabeth, or to, in fact, Lady Jane Grey.
Yeah.
That's what they want, ideally. The 3 of the rebellions don't actually manifest themselves, and instead it's just Wyatt who's left behind in Kent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he kind of decides to kind of kick off against the system. Whether or not it's because this idea of a woman leader as a major sign of weakness, or just and therefore opportunistic nobles trying to take advantage of that, or as a direct response, or I should say, is it as a direct response to her marriage to Philip of Spain?
And the xenophobia that's with that.
You get a lot of kind of foreigner hatred by her marrying Philip of Spain, and there's this resentment or this thought that he's going to take over and Britain will essentially become a Spanish kingdom from that as well. You've also got at the same time the economic hardships that are taking place. Of the population has increased, there's been yet more bad harvests, and you've also yet again always, and with Mary also religious change that's brought in. As a Catholic, she tries to kind of get Britain back to, I'm saying Britain, get England back to being Catholic, which again leads to resentment.
Yeah, and again, a lot of the areas that are rebelling are again Protestant, and those are the ones who have the most influence in government are the Protestant nobles.
Yeah.
There's not that many Catholic nobles. They obviously do exist, but there are more Protestant ones.
Yeah. We've got with the Wyatt rebellion that obviously Wyatt tries to bring an army into London and get rid of get rid of Mary that way. And actually Mary shows real strength with her response to that, which is with the Guildhall speech, of where she stands up in front of, I don't think it's all Londoners, I'll be honest. I don't think they fit in that hall. Quite a lot of Londoners in a hall. And she delivers a speech whereby she talks about how this marriage she suggests children, she suggests that, you know, the dynasty will live on, that they should trust her, that she's married to the country, that's her loyalty. And it works because they protect her. And they go out and defend, is it Blackfriars and Fleet Street and places like that they go out purposely and blockade the road.
And bring up the London Bridge.
Yeah.
And then moving on to the Northern Rebellion, which is November 1569 to January 1570, and it's within the first 10 years of Elizabeth's reign, really, or just after the first 10 years of Elizabeth I's reign. So it'd be a bit mean to get a question that would go up this far, really.
But they are allowed to do it.
But they can do it.
They can do whatever they like.
Want.
You might also get that the Northern Rebellion isn't referred to as the Northern Rebellion, but the
Rising of the North.
Yeah, very Game of Thronesy again.
Yeah.
You see?
You can tell when we've recorded this one.
I know. So you've got the idea of the Northern Rebellion shows a lack of control within those local councils up in the north.
Yeah. And that's unusual considering there hasn't been one since Pilgrim of Grace, and Cromwell had really sorted out the Council of the North after that and made it like a permanent figure. Yeah,
so it's whether or not you could say that the Northern Rebellion itself shows another resistance to a female leader because of that, because that security within the Council of the North was there until Elizabeth comes in. Does this show that they are in fact against a female ruler?
Yeah, so therefore instability within her, not like respecting her.
Yeah.
You've also got the religious aspect of it. Again, they're using Mary, Queen of Scots, as their figurehead. They want to put her on the throne. They don't like religious change that Elizabeth decided to put in place. Even though it's been going on for about 10 years, that all of a sudden they're really, really annoyed about it. And it's because of Mary, Queen of Scots arriving, really. Yeah, and they also, the nobles of the north, seem to really hate Cecil in particular. There seems to be real resentment that he's the one pulling the strings, that he's this sinister advisor who's telling her to do all these things as well. So they want rid. Yeah, they don't like the fact that they've been pushed out and Southerners have got much more control and responsibility, especially in the north as well.
Yeah.
So it's a consequence of that, really.
Yeah.
She puts it down quite well. You get quite a lot of them get executed. I can't remember the number.
They get hung, drawn and quartered as well, don't they, in that typical way. She's able to use the rebellion to kind of strengthen her own position, because she then rejigs the Council of the North and puts in a Protestant Earl of Huntingdon.
Yes.
And kind of uses the opportunity of the Northern Rebellion to strengthen her own position. I think she locks Mary Queen of Scots up more. The security around Mary Queen of Scots gets tightened up that little bit more.
But then you get a load more plots. So again, really probably a better response might have been to just get rid of Mary Queen of Scots, but she continues to keep her alive for quite a long time, causing more instability.
Yeah, and I think you've got the issue with Mary Queen of Scots that if she kills her, she makes her a martyr.
Yeah.
Immediately, and maybe that's too dangerous for her to do in 1570.
Yeah, she's not quite secure enough, as the rebellion is showing. Needs to leave it for a little bit, perhaps. But you could also argue it is a weakness for not just killing her straight away.
Yeah.
Which, there's obviously lots of issues there.
Yeah, so we'll move on to a question then.
Yeah. So this question is one of the specimens, I believe.
Yeah.
From AQA.
You can find online an answer to the question that we're going to go through.
Yeah, and we're going to go through it differently to the answer that was on AQA, partly because it's they considered a good level 4.
Yeah.
I do wonder if they look back at it now whether they changed their mind, because the answer actually misses out one of the rebellions, which doesn't really make sense. Mary Rebellion.
Yeah.
Why? They surely haven't answered the question properly. They haven't got quite a good range of evidence there. But they also say the conclusion's not very good, but they still say it's level 4, and I think I wouldn't be happy to say that. But the way they really go through the answer is to go through the causes rather than the rebellions, which we're not going to do.
No, and there's a slight problem of going rebellion by rebellion in the fact of you just describe each rebellion.
It could be descriptive.
It could be descriptive.
Or too chronological.
Yeah, too chronological, too descriptive, and that's not what you want from a response or an essay. You want it to be an argument. You want it to be well developed. That you're not just saying, it happened then. You're saying, right, this is the reason why it happened and the impact that it had.
Yeah.
Our question that we found is rebellions in the years 1549 to 1571 stemmed from the weakness of central government.
What a lovely question.
Oh, central government. It will put you off straight
central
away.
Government?
Again, with a mid-Tudor crisis or period, look at the dates. So 1549 to 71.
Yeah, so we've got 2 years after Henry VIII's death, so it's definitely Edward, and then it goes up to 71, so it's definitely Mary, and it also includes Elizabeth.
Yeah.
So we know then that the rebellions we've discussed are totally relevant to this question.
Yeah.
And I think other bits that we need to point out in terms of this question, so we've got the period, we've got the rebellions in the years 1549 to 1571 stemmed from the weakness of central government. So it's talking about causes, really, if it's saying stemmed.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you're not concentrating too much on the consequences or how it's handled, because it's really just talking about the causes, and relating it back to whether or not that was about weakness of central government. What would you say central government is?
We talked about this just before we started recording, of what on earth is central government. I would put it down as what Westminster is deciding, of what decisions are coming from London.
Exactly, yeah.
And then being passed to local councils and things like this as well, of the wider government policies.
So it's Westminster, so that could be Parliament, Privy Council, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Her advisors. As a whole, it's London.
Yeah.
More vaguely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so best foot forward, what would you go with first? Of rebellions in the years 1549 to 1571 stemmed from the weaknesses of central government. Where would you start?
So I think we might as well start with Western.
Yeah.
But assess it on that level then. What cause would you say it is? What is your opening point? And then make sure you're going to be evaluating the causes in relation to central government as well.
Yeah, so you've got with the Western Rebellion, it's a good example to start with because it is exactly a response to central government religious changes that have taken place.
Yeah.
You see that as the Prayer Book Rebellion. It is a direct response to the changes that Edward and the Regency Council have introduced.
Yeah, and then you can talk about other policies that they've also created, like the sheep tax. So it's twofold in terms of the weakness of central government. Some of their policies aren't working for their area and are not seen as appropriate for their area, and they're not happy about obviously the religious change. And you could also talk about again the fact that it's a Regency Council.
Yeah, and I think you could then counteract your argument of all the things that central government have done that have stemmed this kind of rebellion, to then say, but it wasn't all about central government. There were economic problems that had taken place. There were religious kind of local issues that were going on at that time. It's quite an isolated rebellion. They're not working towards London, so it shows us that the rebels themselves aren't against central government. They're against local government and local actions.
Yeah, the impact, you could argue, that the policies are having on a local level. So it depends on, once you evaluate it, how you would say whether or not their policies are weak.
Yeah.
And I think really you'd probably end up saying that these ones are about weakness of central government, because it's a direct response to this lack of authority that a Regency Council is going to have, and possible legitimacy as well, especially Somerset taking over the Regency Council. Your evaluation would, weigh up the fact that it's more problematic in the Western region because they are Catholic and they don't want those changes to happen. But in terms of a direct threat to central government, it isn't particularly. They're just a bit upset.
Yeah.
So I think, to an extent, it's a number of things, but there certainly is a responsibility that can be laid at the weakness of central government.
Yeah, so that's the Western Rebellion. We could also talk about the Ket's Rebellion as well. Now, this again is a direct response to a decision made by central government in the idea of enclosure.
Yeah. That they have Somerset again, you could say, a similar point you could lead on from Western to Ket to say they do seem to have less authority and less legitimacy because some of the decisions they're making are being directly challenged locally. He said he was going to sort out enclosure. He sends out people to investigate the extensive
survey, isn't it?
And then they're waiting eagerly to see what he's going to do. The sheep tax is about it. And there's some more, I think, opportunities to be able to take people to court over enclosure, but that's about it. And they just don't really think it's solving any of the issues.
It's almost like he raises the expectations that something is going to be done and then nothing happens at all. So it's this frustration with the central government and with the Regency Council and with Somerset at that time.
Yeah, and there's it's class antagonism, isn't it, as well, because they're much poorer and they're seeing all these gentry nobility who have benefited from being able to gain all this monastic land, and they're not being penalised for the enclosure that they're doing. So you could definitely say there's a lot of things that could be tied back to that weakness of central government not really acting on things that they've promised, and because they don't really have a king or a queen in full authority, they're able to be challenged.
But as a counter-argument, this question's all about, well, did the rebellion stem from weaknesses of central government? The rebels in the Ket's Rebellion have issue with the local clergy as well. So it's not all about central government. There seems to be a little bit of resentment towards that as well. You've also got, again, that it's localised. Again, they're not working towards London. They stop in, what is it called?
Mousehold Heath.
Oh, exciting times in Norwich.
They've got 40,000 people there, haven't they?
Yeah, they've got a lot of people, which shows kind of how angry people are. But the fact they stop in Norwich suggests that this isn't against central government. Again, it's that local issue. They also make a demand to improve local government.
Yeah, it's the class antagonism within that area, not necessarily as a whole.
Yeah, and
they're not trying to revolutionise England.
No, so I think that's where you could balance out your argument and evaluate that as well, of the motives behind these rebels. If it really was against central government, they probably would have pushed on a little bit more.
But again, the question is stemmed from the weakness of central government, and ultimately it does stem from their weak policy and management of things that they said they were going to do. So just make sure that you're evaluating back to that point.
Yeah.
So then if we move on to Mary.
We can indeed. Now, the example hasn't got this in, which is controversial.
Yeah, so ours are going to be a much better answer.
Totally. So let's go with the White Rebellion, of the White Rebellion itself kicking off because of weaknesses of central government. Go on.
Yes, well, I think you could say certainly to a large point there is weakness of central government because Mary isn't really liked. She doesn't have many advisors that are her religion who are particularly on side with the things that she wants to do, so she's having to push a lot to get the religious change.
She can't really pass any legislation at the time of the rebellion either in 1554. She's really struggling to get anything done. Yeah,
she's having to negotiate and compromise a lot, so she doesn't look particularly strong. So you could say that this is also the first woman monarch properly that we've had for a very long time. So is it partly a challenge to that, the fact that she doesn't really have authority because she's a woman and a Catholic woman, and all the people that she's working with pretty much are Protestant?
Yeah, isn't it in 1554 you've still got Lady Jane Grey is floating around at this time in prison.
And she dithers as well about executing her too.
So that maybe adds to it of this sign of weakness in central government, that she can't pass legislation. She's trying to get this religious policy passed, and she's not doing anything with Lady Jane Grey. Does show a weakness in central government that people then take advantage of.
Yeah, so you could also link that to her wanting to marry Philip, and again, central government making it very difficult for her to do that. But to counter it, you could argue that despite these things, they are negotiating and they are working together. Before this has happened, they've managed to reach an agreement that Philip cannot be considered king of England, and she submits to that, and then even more so submits after this rebellion. So then you can come back to all the other things that are happening at that time, like we were saying, that actually, is it more just they don't want a Spanish person being her kind of consort?
Yeah, and it's always that xenophobia at that time. That seems to be the biggest motive behind the Wyatt Rebellion. It's not necessarily about Mary, it's about Philip.
And also, I guess, the fact that he's Catholic, there is a Catholic element to it. The fact that he's Spanish, he is also Catholic.
Yeah.
So there is a religion aspect to it. But they have been working on that and trying to negotiate and trying to compromise on that previously. So that, they're getting there on that regard.
And you've got the other problem as well of it's not just that central government is weak, you've got economic hardship during the time of Mary as well. The cloth trade even has taken a decline. There are religious changes coming about, which again people are frustrated with, which is why they'd be willing to join the rebellion.
It's Protestant strongholds again taking hold of that, so there's certainly some religious motivation. But again, like we were saying, it's whether you want to say the religious change, are they upset about the fact that she's trying to change it, or is it more just they don't like the change as a whole, because they're Protestant. But remember, the Protestants are a smaller community at this time, so how much of a threat are they really, and how much are everyone going to be in favour of that?
Yeah, and it's, your question here of the rebellion stemming from the weaknesses of central government that's where your question really lies, your argument really lies with it as well.
Yeah, and I think you probably evaluate that actually, despite the fact they've got a lot of these difficulties and conflict, they are working together, and I wouldn't say central government really is that weak with Wyatt, because again, you've got her Guildhall speech managers to unite them and work on her behalf, so they see her as a monarch.
Yeah, and the fact London come out and protect her.
Yeah,
it's London, it's an unfriendly place.
Yeah,
that's too general a sweeping statement.
I'm assuming it's never changed.
Exactly. So the fact she can unify them does show an element of strength to an extent.
Yeah.
And then obviously we've got the Northern Rebellion as well, in terms of the Northern Rebellion stemming from weaknesses in central government. As we said before, this shows the lack of control in those northern localities.
Yeah, that it started to deteriorate after the changes that Cromwell made. And is it because she's a woman?
Yeah.
And is it also because they don't like Cecil, they feel resentment towards it? So again, there's definitely stemming from weakness of central government here. And it is fairly early on in her reign, in the first 10 years, so she hasn't quite consolidated her power enough. So I think to a large part, yes, it is. But again, is it more that they're resentful of the amount of strength that she does have and Cecil has, and it's just an attack on that? And the fact that she's obviously able to put it down would suggest that it isn't that it's weak, it's that it's strong.
Yeah, and you've got with the Northern Rebellion of the idea that they want to reinstate Mary Queen of Scots as the heir, if not as the Queen. Is that a religious motive behind it? Because Mary Queen of Scots is Catholic, obviously. So there's a bit of evaluation you could do there regarding the religious motives behind it.
Yeah, but again, because they're all Catholic, is it because they don't like her policy in the religious settlement? But considering it's been 10 years almost that they've had this religious settlement in and there hasn't really been any issue, is that really a weak policy? Is it more they're just getting really annoyed that they don't have as much control that they used to have?
Are they just frustrated, opportunistic nobles at that time?
Yeah. So overall, what would you say?
I think you've got, always with rebellions during the Tudor period, there are multiple grievances to any rebellion that takes place. For this one, I think you could argue
that they all have definitely some stemming from the weakness of central government, but I probably wouldn't say overall it is just weakness of central government. I think if you're going to tie it down to anyone in particular that maybe has that as his strongest argument, is probably the ones under Edward.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because you've got Regency Council that has been taken over by Somerset. He hasn't really got legitimacy to do that, and he totally mishandles those rebellions and ends up being dispatched swiftly afterwards. So that would suggest that that is a weakness of central government if he's the only one out of all of them that does end up going as a consequence.
Yeah, and I think therein lies your judgment for the whole question.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. It's that time of the podcast, and because I'm ill, I can't answer the question.
That's just ridiculous. I feel like I've answered far too many of these.
No, it's because I'm ill. So, Elizabeth I.
Mm-hmm.
She has a ruff.
She does.
She wears a ruff a lot. If you had to make a ruff for Elizabeth out of biscuits, what biscuit would you make the ruff?
I know I've talked about them before, but I do think they'd be most appropriate. Viennese whirls.
Oh, that's a good call.
They're crinkly, aren't they?
Yeah, that's true, actually. Golden crunch ones. You know, the ones with the cream in the middle.
Yeah. But there'd be a bit of a yellow crispy one there. But I think Viennese whirls almost
it's
looks
quite
exactly...
heavy though, isn't it?
I mean, it's not a biscuit, perhaps a meringue.
Do you think she'd eat them?
Yeah. She's got terrible teeth. She loves sugar.
Just nom nom nom.
Yeah, she'd just be like, this is lovely. You'd have one down as you're making the ruff. She'd eat it, and then you put another one down, and then you'd be slapping it. Elizabeth, stop it! I'm trying to make you a ruff out of biscuits. And then in the end, she would never have managed to make that
exactly
ruff
because she'd eaten it all, and then she'd die, and you'd have your head chopped off.
After she died?
Yeah, because it would be seen that you were involved with the murder.
Oh no, I'm just saying, I'm just giving a Viennese whirls. I don't see what your problem
there we
is.
go. So our biscuit question has been answered this week in regards to Viennese whirls as a biscuit ruff.
Biscuit ruffs.
Biscuit. Or we should change the name of the podcast.
No.
Biscuit ruffs.
No, it doesn't really make any sense.
Cold and flu, isn't it? I know. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye.